another edition of Hypnosis Helps with me, Neil Myers, hypnosis practitioner. Welcome back. And today I'm going to be talking yet again about hypnosis in connection with weight loss. So why, for those of you that have been watching this series or parts of it, do I feel that we need to do even more about weight loss? Well, I'm going to address a particular aspect of weight loss today, and the particular area I'm going to address today is, for want of a better term, morbid obesity, and by which I mean people who are greatly overweight. And I'm going to be talking about some very specific things that we do, or I do, with people who find themselves in that place, and how that differs from other things that we've spoken about, and how some elements are the same. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Just a little personal note. Those of you that have watched this regularly have probably figured out that I'm not from the United States. I'm originally from the United Kingdom, and I first came to the United States when I was 17, which was a very long time ago. But I lived in the United States for more than 26 years. And the first time I came to the United States from the United Kingdom, and I travelled a little bit. The first time I came, I think I was 16. But I have to tell you viewers that when I arrived in the United States, I had never seen so many very fat people. I'd never encountered it. In the United Kingdom, of course, we have fat people, like everywhere else. But relatively speaking, they're rare to see people very greatly overweight. I'd never seen people above a certain weights at all in my life until I came to the United States. Some years after that, when I came back to the United States to live, I was in the business of giving certain seminars, and I would travel across the country giving these seminars to corporate groups. And I remember very clearly my first seminar that I gave. There were two gentlemen sitting very close to the front. It was a small group. There were 25 people or so, I think. And I don't know how much they weighed individually, but together I would be very surprised if their combined weight was under 800 pounds. And I had never seen two people this heavy in my life at such close quarters, because quite simply you don't encounter people like that, you didn't, at least in the United Kingdom. Very rare. And there they were, two working gentlemen attending my seminar. They both had to sit in very large chairs, and one of them, who was somewhat heavier than the other, and as I say, I very conservatively estimate their combined weight at 800 pounds. My suspicion was it might have been more than that. One of them did have some difficulties moving about, but I'd never encountered anything like this. And so I mention this because it's unfortunately the case that I think it's safe to say that probably the United States has a higher percentage of morbidly obese people than any other country in the world. There are many blessings of being in the United States when it comes to food. We have probably more abundance in food for most of us, although I recognise there are a percentage of people in the country that are starving or have very little food. But for most working Americans who are leading a normal life, there is an abundance of food and an abundance of choice. Sometimes it's been said of the United States that we, and I consider it we now because I've been here a long time, that we are amongst the most overfed and undernourished country in the world. And there is some truth in that. By contrast, I will also say that there are wonderful food choices available in the United States in most areas. When I first came to the United States more than 26 years ago, I was living in a part of rural Pennsylvania. And I can say that at that period of time, when one went to an average supermarket, there were some very poor food choices. There was not the abundance of food choices, particularly in terms of organic foods, vegetables, fruits, fine foods that now exist almost everywhere in the United States. So we're lucky. We have an abundance of food and we have an abundance of choice. However, that same abundance of food and choice for some people has led to a condition where they are very, very, very overweight. If you look up the term obesity, it merely just means fat. When we say obese, we tend to mean people who are beyond fat. The body mass index, which is a measure that some people use and abide by, and is certainly a medically acknowledged measure, uses certain factors for obesity in relation to height. As those of you who've watched me before know, I'm not a huge fan of the body mass index. One of the things that the body mass index does not measure is fat in relation to muscle. It just basically says if you're such and such a height and you're male or female and such a weight, you're either overweight at somewhere between optimal weight or underweight. That's all it really says. And as I've mentioned on the show before, every athlete, according to the body mass index, every one of our football players, basketball players, probably baseball players and many others is obese according to that body mass index, because it doesn't really account for dense muscle. It's a measure. So it's just a guideline. But when we talk about morbidly obese, I'm talking about people carrying extraordinary amounts of excess fat. I'm talking about some of the men and women that I see in my office. Some women I see are 5 foot, 5'1", 280 pounds and more. These people have a serious problem. It's not the same as being 10 pounds overweight, 15 pounds overweight. We're talking about people 70, 80, 90, 100 and more pounds overweight. And so this particular show is going to be talking a little bit about that. So that's the context of it. Now, one thing I'd like to do is I'd like to race to the end as to where we're going. Where's this all going? What's the point of dieting anyway? And should we be on a diet of whatever type for all of our lives? Well, there are some people who believe that a diet, which really means a way of eating, is something that we should be adopting for all of our lives. And when we say a diet, we usually mean some form of caloric food restriction so as to move from a state of carrying too much unhealthy fat to a healthier state. That's what we conventionally mean. And so the question arises, should we be on a diet of that type, or any type, all of our lives? And it's my strong belief and contention, and I'm not the only one that believes it, there's a strong body of medical evidence, psychological evidence saying the same thing, is that we really shouldn't be on diets for the rest of our lives. There's a strong questioning of whether it's ever valuable to be on any diet at all. And we've talked about that a little bit and how that works with the use of hypnosis. So ideally, I want my clients to, when they've completed not just my programs, but have moved towards and have attained their ideal healthy weight, I don't want them to feel that to maintain that they have to be wedded to any particular diet. So the goal of my programs and the goal of what I recommend is for people to be diet free of any diet. Now, for some people, that statement is in itself heresy. There is a large body of opinion which supports one or other diet, whether it's a ketogenic diet, a paleo diet, a Pritikin type diet, a California type diet, a macrobiotic diet, and all the various other diets, all of whom argue with some evidence, some persuasive evidence, others not so much evidence, that theirs is the right way to be. There was even a diet some years ago that I haven't seen so much, which was used as characterised by a phrase, eat right for your type. And it talked about different genetic markers, different blood types, and different ancestral histories that govern how we respond to food, how our body processes food. And so it made the point that there wasn't one diet for all, that depending upon your genetics, your blood type, where you came from, ancestrally, and all of these factors governed foods that were better for you or foods that were worse for you. I myself, at different times in my life, just in the interests of openness, have experimented when I was much younger with different diets. For a period of years I was a vegetarian. For a period of years I ate a diet with no cooked food. And I personally found that these diets didn't really agree with me. I didn't enjoy them, I didn't feel healthy on them, I didn't feel energetic. They weren't diets for me. Now, for those of you out there who are vegetarians or vegans, and we can argue the merits of that, or even who eat an entirely raw diet, some of you might find that that's beneficial, some of you might enjoy that diet, that's fine. But my general point is that I don't want any of my clients to be wedded to any particular diet except if they have very, very particular conditions. For example, those suffering from type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes, adult onset diabetes, of course have to be on specific diets because their blood sugar levels have to be controlled. That's different. There are one of my clients at the present time is having dialysis. She has to because she really needs to have a kidney transplant, and hopefully will have a kidney transplant sometime relatively shortly. But while she's on that, she has to be on a special, I think it's termed a renal diet. And of course these are very specific things, and hypnosis can be of benefit here because these diets are very often difficult to stick to, and even with powerful medical reasons to do so for people. And so hypnosis can help support and underlie the emotions that are necessary to maintain a diet of that type. There may be other reasons why people do need to diet. Some people need to diet because they're going to have a medical procedure. They need to lose weight very fast. And again, one could argue the merits of particular diets, but it's certainly the case that if you need to lose weight very quickly for a specific medical reason, like an upcoming surgical procedure, then you may need to follow a diet for a period of time. I've mentioned, when I mentioned the 7 steps, the 7 elements of the pathway towards an ideal healthy weight on previous shows, that temporarily a diet may have benefit. I spoke with a doctor on the show where she talked about a combination kind of keto-paleo diet which can have benefit as a short-term boost. We've talked about intermittent fasting as a diet where people take in 500 to 600 calories, say 2 days in a week, but eat pretty normally the rest of the time. These can have certain benefits long-term, short-term, long-term, medium-term. But it's still my contention that all of these measures should be on a short-term basis. That the question that people who diet frequently don't ask is, what happens when I arrive at my ideal healthy weight? Unfortunately, emotionally, many people find that they arrive at their ideal healthy weight through diet and exercise, and very often, if they've been using diet primarily as a means of getting to their ideal healthy weight, which usually involves restriction, forcing themselves not to eat certain things, often a great deal of willpower, deprivation, and everything that goes with it, a strange psychological and emotional effect can frequently happen, which is this, is they arrive at their ideal healthy weight, and then they say, and this is it, this is all I've got, this is what's happened, this is what all the sacrifice, all the deprivation is there for. Do I want this? And they can actually become, and I've had this with people that have approached me, mildly depressed because they realise that all the deprivation that they've gone through just isn't worth it. The candle isn't, the light isn't worth the candle, as they say in the UK, an old saying. And that's not where we want to be, and not where we want our clients to get to. And then of course what tends to happen is that they very often abandon a diet, or they'll start to go into a cycle of binging on food, and they're often back where they were. Now, I mentioned on the last show the person who you've heard me mention many times, the hypnosis practitioner Dave Ellman, who comments on the fact back in the 1950s that people that he saw, a hypnotic diet frequently helped them short term, but a year or a year and a half later, they were often back in his office with the doctor who prescribed a diet and or medication plus the hypnosis at the weight they were, or more than the weight they were. And so it was been said that hypnosis didn't work, or perhaps diets don't work. I'm just having a quick cup of coffee. This is on the diet. But as he pointed out, it wasn't the hypnosis or even the diet that was the problem. And as we talked about on the last episode, the problem is emotions underneath that's driving that need to consume food. Frequently, those emotions are to do with security. Sometimes the need for security, and that security is connected with weight, that one needs to be a particular weight to feel secure. So all these factors together are important in a weight management, a weight loss plan. And I'm going to say that when it comes to people who are morbidly obese, greatly overweight, 80, 90, 100, 150 pounds, 200 pounds beyond the weight they should be and more, then it is, in my opinion, and I'm going to state this boldly, foolish not to look at emotional aspects of what's happening in a person's life. It's not just about diet, it's not just about food, it's not just about attitudes towards food in the simplest ways. There's more going on there. One doesn't wake up and suddenly find oneself weighing 400 pounds, 350 pounds, 500 pounds. It doesn't happen like that. It happens, as of course, over time. And so over time there have been emotional factors. And so when somebody comes and asks me about hypnosis and weight loss, who I consider to be morbidly obese, very, very, very heavy, I'm more or less insistent that we address and talk about the emotional connection that they have or don't have to food. And again, of course, that's nothing particularly new. I'm not the first person ever to say that, and many people in the who specialise, doctors who specialise in obesity, agree. But the problem is then, how do they address it? What do they do? Most frequently, people who are very, very heavily overweight do not know exactly why, what emotions are leading to them consuming food in such quantities, putting on weight in an enormous way. They don't really know. They have no idea. And it can be quite desperate for such people and quite frankly sad, because very often they feel guilty about their behaviour, they feel guilty about their weight, they feel ashamed of themselves, but they don't know how to tackle the problem at all. And this is an area, firstly, where hypnosis can be of great benefit, because in my practice at least, when people come to me at that sort of weight, then one of the things we use is the process that you've heard me talk about before, which is regression. And by regression, we simply mean going back in a hypnotic state as to where it all started. Because it's my contention and my belief, based upon not just my work and my cases, but the cases and the work of many other people in the hypnotic field over the years, that at some point they start a dysfunctional relationship with food. And this can be found and ascertained through the process of what I call healing hypnosis by regression to cause. We are healing the cause that is causing them to damage themselves and make themselves unhappy by overeating. And so the first port of call is to address that element of it from my perspective. Now, why is it important to look at this for very heavily overweight people first? Why not, it might be argued, just put them on some very restricted diet of some type? Why not do that? Surely that's the key problem, and then deal with the emotions afterwards. Well, I believe that that's putting the cart before the horse. It's the wrong way round. Why? I think people will have great difficulty accepting almost any diet, any change of behaviour, any new procedure, or even a no diet procedure with a change of eating pattern, if those essential emotions which are driving the need to eat and behave in this way, unless they're addressed. If they're not addressed, even if a diet or even medication has a temporary or short-term effect, they will either struggle immensely or pretty soon put that same weight back on. And again, you don't need me to tell you that. I'm sure that everybody who's watching this show knows somebody who is very overweight and who has probably struggled going on diets and off diets and trying all sorts of different things maybe for years and years and years. And I would say that whatever diet you adopt and however you look at it, if you are very, very overweight, and it's not just a question of small changes in eating and small changes in diet, you need to address the emotional aspect, your relationship to food. If you don't address that, all results are going to be temporary, short term, or you'll struggle immensely with it. So that's the first thing. And again, it goes beyond the hypnosis that I've talked about in connection with weight loss in some of the other shows. As you might remember, the hypnosis for some of those was a question very often of direct suggestion hypnosis, whereby we bring people into a hypnotic state and suggest certain new practices as to how they eat, perhaps how they stick to a particular diet if they choose to go the dietary route, and other things. This goes beyond that. We're looking to find how it all started, what happened, what occurred. And this is not, is frequently not achievable in just one session. I wish it was. Sometimes it demands multiple sessions. The relationship between emotion and food is frequently much more complex and much more difficult to ascertain than most people believe. It can be very, very deep, going back to the earliest times. It often involves relationships with parents, particularly mother, sometimes father, sometimes grandmothers. Very, very deep. There are all sorts of factors involved, family factors, as well as the individual emotional factors. So frequently, what this means practically is that there needs to be 2, 3, 4, maybe more sessions of healing hypnosis to get back to the initial sensitizing events, to get back to the cause. Now, when we're doing the healing hypnosis, we're also layering in new practices, because as emotions, feelings and sensations trapped in the system related to food are released, there is the gap, the openness, the opportunity to introduce new practices, new beliefs, new attitudes connected with food. But one has to siphon off, as it were, the old energies, the old attitudes, the old emotions before we can get to those. So this is very, very important, and this is where we get to. In fact, when people approach me for help using hypnosis because they've heard that hypnosis can help with weight loss and are very overweight, if they are super overweight and they're not willing to go through that sort of process and practice, I tell them that I'm not the hypnosis practitioner for them, because I know that it's not really going to be effective for them. So that's the first part. Now, where do we get to next? What happens then? Well, I'd like to take a slight sidebar on this and circle back round to our starting point and ending point. I know that sounds all very confusing at first. Here's what I mean. Some of you may have heard of a procedure called the hypnotic gastric band or hypnotic lap band. Now, many of you know that people, sometimes some famous people, I believe the broadcaster and weatherman Al Roker had, I can't remember if he had gastric band or lap band surgery, but the essential idea is the same. For people who are very overweight and may have been struggling with their weight for years, decades possibly, it's recommended by some medical professionals who specialise in obesity that they have lap band or gastric band surgery. There are technical differences between the two, which is not necessary for us to go into here on this show, and I'm not the person best qualified to talk about it anyway. But essentially, the idea is that the size of the stomach is restricted so much that it can actually hold very, very little food at one time. And so therefore, one is almost forced to be on a diet because one feels one just can't eat so much food. Now, this is very interesting because for some people this is a very successful procedure. I am told medically that both gastric band and lap band surgery are much safer than they used to be many years ago, and that the procedures are generally much safer. But still, if one opts to do that, it's pretty drastic because one is opting for major medical procedure. And so one of the most interesting things that occurred to me in my work some years ago, which really shocked me, was that somebody approached me for hypnosis actually to deal with chronic pain and nothing to do with weight. And they mentioned in the course of time that they were interested in the possibility of using hypnosis to lose weight because they were overweight. I won't say that they were morbidly obese, but they were probably carrying at least 60 or 70 pounds more than they needed to. Female, she was quite a large lady. I mean, she was tall and a big woman, but she was clearly overweight and she knew it. And I mentioned some things, and I mentioned in passing gastric band, lap band surgery. And to my astonishment, she said to me, oh yes, I've had that. In fact, I was one of the first people to have it in the state, and at the time we were in Connecticut. And she said, in fact, I actually worked in the doctor's office who gave me the surgery for 5 years. And I said, what did you do there? And she said, well, I did various duties, but one of my main duties was to act as a support group for people who had had the gastric band, lap band, and I can't remember which one it was, surgery. And I said, support for what? I didn't know much about this. And she explained to me that at the time, and I know some of this has improved, there were various problems with the after effects of the surgery. But one of the most striking things was that many of the people, quite a high number of the people, at some point, after they'd lost a considerable amount of weight, then begin to put it on. And she was one of these people. And apparently I didn't even think that that was possible at the time. And then when I thought about it from a hypnotic standpoint, it seemed almost obvious. Why? Well, we've talked about on the show before that the subconscious mind governs all the functions of the body, including the brain, the nervous system, the digestive system, the organ function, the blood flow, the lymphatic system. They're all under the governance of the intelligence of the subconscious mind, this marvellous thing that keeps us alive and keeps us healthy, the very spirit of life. And the subconscious mind, being the powerful thing that it is, will find a way. And if there's still the need in that individual to be heavy, for whatever reason, somehow, despite the gastric band surgery, it will find a way. Maybe it will slow the metabolism down. Maybe it will cause them to make different food choices. But incredibly, even with an extraordinarily shrunken stomach, and I'm told the stomach is very small, tiny, like the size of a golf ball, very small. These people who had had this surgery, not all of them, but a good percentage of them, would find a way, or subconsciously find a way, against their conscious will, to put on weight again. And this was the condition that this lady was in. I didn't even think that that was possible. And then when I did some investigation into it, I found it was more common than is frequently believed and not talked about so much. So there it is. So are we going to describe this as a failure of gastric band or lap band surgery? Well, possibly, but I would say more impressively, perhaps, it's a demonstration of the extraordinary power of the subconscious mind, even when enormous physical restrictions are put on the body, to find a way to fulfill the programs that are there. So even with people who have had the surgery, they may need to address some of these things hypnotically if they want to maintain their weight. And I don't want to get into the various health problems that may occur, that do occur with gastric and lap band surgery, that you can investigate on your own if you wish to. And as I said, there are people much more expert than me who can give you better information than I can about that. So we come to something very strange called the hypnotic gastric band. What does that mean? Well, some years ago, a number of people in the United Kingdom, including the well-known hypnosis practitioner Paul McKenna and others, did some investigation